We're going to continue our conversation on identity with Robin Hammond, the founder of Witness Change, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing human rights through visual storytelling. He's the winner of a World Press Photo Prize, the R.F. Kennedy Journalism Award, 3 Pictures of the Year International Award, the W. Eugene Smith Award for Humanistic Photography, and the recipient of 5 Amnesty International Awards for Human Rights Journalism. His latest work on homophobia and transphobia around the world is Where Love is Legal, and has been exhibited around the world and it has been featured in numerous publications, including on the cover of Time magazine. Please welcome Robin Hammond.
Thank you for that lovely introduction and welcome. So I'm a photojournalist and a storyteller and a human rights activist. 20 years ago, when I was a similar age to, I guess, many of you here, I picked up a camera and I discovered the power of photography. I discovered photography mostly back then in photo books, and it was photography that made me care about, or start my interest in care about the world. And it was with photography that I thought that maybe I can see and make a contribution to making the world a better place. So I think we're all kind of here because we hope that the world can be a better place. But I think we also all recognize that it's very hard to do by ourselves, and we need collaborators, and we need funders, and we need to influence, and we need to inspire. And I think storytelling can play a really important role in that. And I think visual storytelling especially, it certainly made me care, and it made me want to be a visual storyteller. So I left my home in New Zealand and went to the other side of the world to start this career in photojournalism. I had no idea of how difficult that would be, but once I got my foot in the door, I worked very hard to start this career as a photojournalist, working for newspapers and magazines. And I had this assumption that my images appearing in publications would have a positive impact on the lives of the people who I was documenting. And sometimes that happened, but to be honest, not that much. And after many years of doing that, that became, pretty disappointing. And I became disillusioned with my part in the industry. So at the same time, I had colleagues and human rights organizations praising me for my work, which was very nice, but to be honest, I felt like a bit of a fraud. I was doing 30, 40, 50 stories a year, and I would go to a country and I would shoot an assignment for a few short days, and then I would leave and move on to the next thing the newspaper or magazine wanted me to do. And I became concerned about the integrity of my work, about its authenticity. And I was really worried that all I was doing was reaffirming stereotypes. I should say that I did do work which I was very proud of. In fact, some of the photos here behind me comes from that period. But at the end of every year, I would look back at the 40 stories that I had done and felt that it was the beginnings of 40 important issues I was documenting, but that I had moved on to start a new thing. So eventually I hit a wall, and I couldn't do this anymore, and I decided that I needed to change what I was doing. And I decided that I had to make my work be true to myself, be true to the people who I was documenting, and my work had to have integrity and authenticity, and I decided that above all, I needed my work to have impact. So with this very clear vision came concrete actions, and I almost stopped completely working for magazines and newspapers, and I started working on stories about issues that I thought were important. And within a couple of years, I started my own not-for-profit organization, which I called Witness Change. So these days, I really do work for magazines and newspapers, and rather they are collaborators. And most of my work now revolves around amplifying the voices of people from marginalized groups whose expression is somehow diminished by elements within their society who are neglectful or hostile towards them. And I create websites and social media campaigns and still work with traditional print publications in order to disseminate that work. And my role and my goal is really very, very clear now. I exist to create meaningful stories that have a positive impact in the lives of the people I document. So, I really believe that storytelling is a powerful form of communication, but I've come to understand that how we tell those stories is fundamental to whether or not they have an impact. And if they're done right, they can make issues which are misunderstood or abstract, they can make them real and relatable. And I think Bujay's story is a good example of this. So many of us know, and we've heard about this, today, that homophobia can be deadly, and Bujay knows this better than the rest of us. Now, Bujay is covering his face because he's afraid. In fact, Bujay isn't really his name. He asks that we hide his identity because who he is, where he lives in northern Nigeria, means that he can be executed. So I met him and 4 other young men shortly after they'd been released from prison. They'd languished in this jail for 40 days. They were tortured in prison and they were lashed with a whip in court. But fortunately, their case was dismissed. But the community in which they lived was not satisfied with the verdict. They waited outside the courtroom, armed with rocks, intending to stone Bujay and his friends to death. So Bujay went back inside the courtroom and waited until the crowd dispersed. Eventually, that crowd went away and they went home, but their suffering didn't finish there. They arrived home to find themselves ostracized by their own family members. And Bujay fell very ill, and one of his relatives came to him and said, God should take your life away so that we can all have peace because you have caused such shame to our family. Those physical scars would heal, but this rejection from their own flesh and blood is what cut deepest. Being gay, an essential part of Bujay's identity, means that he is an outcast and a criminal. Prior to meeting Bujay, I regarded homophobia and transphobia as bigoted and unjust, but that was like an intellectual judgment. In hearing his story, I got a sense of what it felt like, and it connected with me on an emotional level. So we've made some great gains in this fight for equality around the world. There are 780 million people living in countries where same-sex relationships are legal, but I need you to understand that there are 2.8 billion people living in countries where consensual same-sex acts are a crime. Stories like Bujay's, I believe, makes real the impact of those laws and makes real those statistics. So I got to know Bujay, and I was very moved by his story, and I thought others would be too. So I started a project to tell the stories of survival from LGBTQI+ people from around the world. And I called this project Where Love is Illegal. So 3 months after launching Where Love is Illegal, the images appeared on the cover of Time magazine. We had 100,000 followers on Instagram. We had exhibitions around the world. And then volunteers joined me in my efforts, and we used Where Love is Illegal to raise money for LGBT groups in countries where I'd worked, in Uganda and in South Africa. And we did storytelling workshops in Tunisia and Jamaica. And when the group that helped me to meet Bujay in northern Nigeria, when they contacted me and they said that there were 4 more young men who'd been arrested, they were in prison, and we needed to do something about it, we thought that maybe we would be in a position to be able to help them out. So we launched a social media campaign. And within 24 hours, we raised this money to be able to pay for their bail, to get them lawyers, and the lawyers went in and got their case dropped. So while Where Love is Illegal has not, at least yet, changed the world for LGBT people, it really made a world of difference for these young men. So it was Bujay's story that connected people to people they would never meet and to places they would never go, and it reinforced to me the power of storytelling. For many of those people, telling their story it was a liberating experience, but for others it was really, really tough. And for some, it was highly risky. For some, should they be identified, they could face further persecution. They could even be killed. But many wanted to tell their story, and I was desperate to share them. But the only way that was going to be possible was if it was done on their terms. So when I met the guys in northern Nigeria, at the time I was shooting on another assignment for National Geographic in the south of the country, and I was using a large format camera and a Polaroid film. A large format camera, for those who don't know, is an old-fashioned camera with bellows on the front, and you put your head under a blanket, and everyone knows what Polaroid film is, like that, but bigger. So I decided I would continue to shoot this film for this project. And at first that was an aesthetic decision, but it took on a much greater role. For everyone I photographed, I gave them the option to destroy the picture if they felt it somehow endangered them. And I really felt this process and this physical thing that they could destroy, it built a level of trust. But I didn't have to destroy many though, and that is because from the outset I adopted this new way of working. This process was going to be a collaborative effort. You see, most of us photographers, when we make portraits, we like to control every aspect of the photograph. But here I was handing back control, and I was allowing people to choose their pose and their clothes and their expression, and how much of their face that we would see was completely down to them. So I also wanted them to tell their story in their own way. So I asked each of the people I photographed to write their own testimony of survival. So we had here, many for the first time, people who controlled, for the first time in their lives, how they were heard and how they were seen. But sometimes the results were unexpected. Jessie, I'll tell you about Jessie. Jessie is a young transgender woman who lives in a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon. And her young life has been one of extreme hardship. She's been thrown out of school and bullied. She's been raped. And shockingly, her brother and father, in order to protect the family honor, have on several occasions attempted to murder her. And she told me this story, and it was this list of horrendous abuses. So instinctively, I wanted to make a photograph that reflected that story, but she didn't. Well, I found some nice light, and I set up the camera on a tripod, and this big, large format camera with the bellows in the front, and I got my film ready, and I asked her to come into the frame. And she covered her face with this scarf to protect her identity, and she started posing. Before I even was ready to take a photo, she starts posing already. And she lifts up her head, and she pushes out her butt, and she starts seducing the camera with these big, large, dark eyes. And I looked through the viewfinder, and this is not the photograph that I had planned to take. But she was beautiful in front of the camera, and she was proud and strong and empowered. And I reminded myself that I had allowed her to decide how she would be portrayed in front of the camera. So despite this image not matching her story, I took the photographs. Anyway, afterwards we were talking about her story, and it was really disturbing. And I said to her, look, I understand that you identify as a woman. But given the threats that you face, people, your own family members are trying to kill you, wouldn't it be safer? Wouldn't it be wiser to pretend to be a boy? And she looked up at me in shock, and she said, I was born this way, and I will die this way. And in that moment, I understood. Jessie's gender identity is fundamental to who she is. And with that statement, I understood Jessie's courage and her strength. And her photograph was perfect, because you see, what happened to her is not who she is. She sees herself as being a sexy young woman, and that's who she wants you to see. This is her story, and this is her identity. So through the course of this campaign, I've come to understand the power of personal storytelling and the importance of having the people at the heart of the subject have agency over how they are heard and how they're seen. I not only believe that this is the right thing to do, I also believe that it's more effective. Where Love is Illegal has been a successful social media campaign, but I think its success lies in this collaboration, in this authenticity that they bring to the storytelling. But an authentic story, a beautiful photograph, and a powerful testimony alone does not guarantee change. B died just 3 months after this photograph was taken. He wasn't executed or murdered. Like many in his situation, he was killed by poverty. So you have to understand, to be LGBT in many parts of the world is to be desperately poor. It's to be thrown out of schools and jobs. It's to be abandoned by families, and it's to flee abuse. And many LGBT people around the world end up on the margins of society. I met with B in this tin shack this is the wall of his tin shack that you can see in the background, covered with a sheet. I sat with him on this bed with my arm around him while he wept over the man he dreamed of marrying, who was now dead. And he told me about meeting this guy, about how it was a first sight love, and their apprehension of him introducing him to his family, about the mob who chased them at their engagement party, and about his fiancée being stabbed in the chest. And he wept because he was heartbroken, and he wept because he was desperately poor, and he wouldn't be able to afford his rent, and he would be evicted at any day, and he wept because he saw no future. And in the end, this lovely man died because bigotry made him too poor to be able to afford the medical care that he needed. One of his friends informed me of his death, and he told me that there was nothing to remember me by except this story, and he begged that I tell it. He asked that I tell it so that we'd remember B, even if it was only a sad memory. So every time I come and talk about where love is illegal, I talk about B, so that his memory will survive, even if it is only this sad memory. So as activists, we believe in a world without unnecessary suffering. And every needless death, like this one, feels like a failure. So I applaud all of you here for taking this the stand you are, and for hoping for a better world, but you have to know that at times you will fail. But what I would like to give you a word of encouragement from someone who's faced this failure himself is that you have to continue to take the stand in face of this failure, because if you persist, you will almost certainly at some point have success, and sometimes when you least expect it. National Geographic asked me to do a story about 9-year-olds and gender around the world. And at first I thought this would be a fun story to do, but it became very serious very quickly. Now, part of the concept of this story was to ask the 80 children that I would meet, we asked them the same 9 questions so that we could compare and contrast what were their ideas about the agenda. And one of the kids that I met was 9-year-old Avery Jackson. And I had little idea at the time of the significance of meeting her. And I had no idea that she would be the first trans person to grace the cover of this esteemed publication. Nor did I understand how her simple answer would speak a basic truth and a powerful truth about identity to so many people. Authentic stories, I believe, hold a truth that can make us care. And if we care enough, we can take action. And if we take powerful action, I believe that we can have a positive impact on this world. And I think the best stories allow people to express their truth. They allow them to be seen as they want to be seen, and heard as they want to be heard, and valued as their true selves. Thank you.
Some wonderful questions coming in. I love talking to photographers because you're so empathetic and you really translate the person's story. So loads of questions. Let's kick it out. How do you feel about co-opting someone else's story for your own success?
Wow.
Harsh. Harsh. Right in there.
Okay, well, I would answer that by saying that I'm not doing that. I think that it's possible to do, as many organizations say, I think it's possible to do well and do good while doing good. But I think that what I try to do is create platforms for people to express their own stories. In fact, it's really important to me that the people who are at the heart of these stories have the power to control the stories that we are expressing. So with a lot of my work, I also get that I'm almost always an outsider. So I'm really sensitive to that. And, I keep talking about it because I believe it's true, that what I'm here to do is amplify their voices and not take that away from them.
With integrity and authenticity that you mentioned, how do you build trust with your subjects without creating bias from your own eye?
So that's super hard. I always work with local organizations who guide me. The first thing I say to them when I turn up is that I have no idea about their lives, and I will never really understand what they're going through. And so, here's a piece of paper, you tell me. I think it's really important that they have control over the expression of their lives.
How do you leave an assignment knowing that there's so much work to be done, or that the person that you shot is in peril when you leave?
So, and I think that's actually part of the frustration of why I had to change my career to make sure it was impactful. I end up witnessing a lot of really difficult situations, and I do believe that with witnessing comes a certain amount of responsibility. And I think that I would personally really struggle if there wasn't some sort of activism behind the work. I know that there's kind of an argument within the photojournalism and the journalism world about what is our role, and absolutely telling a story, there's value in that in itself, and I think to record history and to make people aware, and all these things are really important. For me, it's really important that there's that, but also that there's some sort of action that people can take if they feel like they're moved by it, and that's important. Also, to some degree, it's a selfish motivation. It's like it helps me to feel better too.
You have to create this powerful image in one frame, but you also have to tell a story. How do you combat and how do you manage perceived stereotypes that somebody may have while they go into looking into a story that you're telling in that one image?
Well, I think I like to think that this work, Where Love is Illegal, helps to break down a lot of stereotypes, and I think that it does that because I handed control over to the people who I'm photographing. But I think context is massively important, and I think that there's also a conversation within photographers about how much control or lack of we have of our imagery, and how someone can take an image which is within a certain context and use it elsewhere. And I live in the UK now, and we saw that with Brexit, how images of refugees were used to make people afraid. And so it's really important to me that while I work with publications, as I said, they are collaborators, and we make sure that we're very careful about that they're used in an appropriate way.
How do you know that the people, especially those who are closed-minded, are actually seeing your work and being influenced by it?
Yeah, you see, it's a really big challenge for us, because while we have many followers on Instagram, we are concerned that we're just preaching to the converted, and so what we're doing with the workshops we're doing in these countries is we go to the LGBT community in this case, and we say, how do we move the needle in your country? And they tell us what needs to happen to make their lives, and how we make their lives better, and who we need to approach, and in which way they think it's effective. Because again, what do I know, right? I mean, and I think it's a real mistake that journalists make, and well, it's a danger of making, and I see it with photographers too, of thinking that a certain community is the same all around the world. And the one thing that I've discovered doing the 100+ stories of people from the LGBT community is that they're all absolutely unique. No one is the same, and every country is a different context. So I'm the first one to put up my hand and say, I don't have a clue what I'm doing. Hold my hand, help me out.
In the last 5 seconds, what are you working on next?
I'm doing a big project on mental health.
Great. Oh, man, you nailed that. 5 seconds. He was done. Thank you so much, Robin Hammond, for joining us, for sharing your amazing images with